Okay, we're finally at the point that we've all been waiting for, which is the pressing and the cooking of the tortilla. At this point, the proof is in the puff. We're either gonna see if we're gonna puff or not puff. Really, the anatomy of a puff or a souffle is when steam is trapped inside of a tortilla, and once it's continues to heat, it expands outward, then it creates a nice ballooning effect. It actually serves a really important purpose, that steam is cooking through the center of a tortilla. So it's important that we're getting it compressed and flat enough to do that. This is really a stylistic preference. Some folks like it a little bit thicker, so there's a little bit milder of a puff. I like it to puff as much as possible so it's really cooking through the center and it gets a nice kind of crisp crust on the outside on the edges where it's been seared. Key to making a puff possible is making sure that there's enough moisture in the masa. So we've already done in that mixing step. We've done the moisture addition that we needed because it dried out a little bit after we ground it down from nixtamal. There's moisture. You want to make sure that the surface temperature is hot enough. So this one is a griddle. It's an electric griddle. It's definitely not as hot as you can get at home. Right now, this is at 425. For perspective, in Mexico and in Oaxaca, the comals are usually about like 650 degrees, 700 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're a little bit off on that. They're going to have a competitive edge on using open fire cooking. But for the sake of what we're doing here in this kitchen, this should be plenty to get at least a mild puff, hopefully. We also want to make sure that the texture is fine enough. You can imagine you can't really get a moist, consistent mass if you have really coarse particles inside of it. It's much denser, it's much harder to lift. So if that texture is not right, and we haven't done that on the grind side, you're gonna have a really hard time. In fact, I would actually say you're never gonna see a tortilla puff from a hand-cranked mill. You're always gonna kind of get a pancake, which is kind of tasty, but like not the table tortilla we're going for. And last but not least, the compression. The compression has to be just tight enough to make sure that you're getting an even sear on both sides, and you can quickly expand that without overcooking it so that it cooks through the center. So this is actually a press that comes from Oaxaca. One of our partners, Doña Rosa, actually makes this. We really love this because it gets you really a thin press on really the first try. I'm not that skilled, so I have to do usually 2 presses to get a puff. So my kind of mnemonic device is press, press, puff. I want to make sure I get 2 presses to kind of lock in that compression and make sure it's going to puff properly. I'm also using just recycled pieces of plastic here from a shopping bag. Really, the thinner the plastic, the better. I would say kind of stay away from the Ziploc bags. If that's the only thing you have, you can use it, but they tend to be a little bit heavier and harder to remove and peel off. So I'm going to take a little bit of masa here. If we were in a restaurant setting, you might be measuring it out for a 6-inch tortilla. Usually you're measuring out about 1 ounce. And it's just got the right enough moisture here for me to make sure that we're going to get that proper puff. I'm going to do a quick roll between the palms of my hand, flatten it out with my fingers here so it gets an even head start. I'm going to close this down. And I'm going to do some force, but not too much. And you can see it's already gotten one consistent shape. It's already kind of circular. It looks good. And in some cases, a lot of folks would stop here. That's fine. This isn't quite as thin as I want it, so I'm going to make sure it's flipped over. And I'm going to do it one more time. Very carefully remove that top layer. And I'm going to let the gravity kind of do its work in my hand and gradually peel back as it's balanced on kind of the bottom 3 fingers of my hand. I'm going to drape it over the plancha or the griddle or whatever your cooking surface is. The idea for this is once it's on there, you want to get a quick sear on both sides so that you're locking in that moisture. And even in the time that this has been being prepared in the course of this shot, it's kind of already started to dry out a little bit. So I've always got this little spritzer next to me. This is an atomizer that's just going to inject a little bit of moisture to make sure it's got enough to work with. Let's do like a quick little spray. I'm going to let this sear on both sides. An analogy you can use is cooking a steak. If you're working, if you've ever cooked professionally a steak, or if you've ever the right way to cook a steak, you really want to get a really hard sear on both sides and then finish it off in the oven. This is kind of a similar concept. We're going to sear off on both sides. So one side, and we're going to flip it back in its original side. That's when we're going to start seeing the puff. It's when it's starting to actually cook through and it's not just searing on both sides. So I've already started to see this. You can see kind of the composition of the surface has changed. It's starting to look like a kind of a lunar surface here. It's got a little bit of kind of a rougher texture because you can see it's started to dry out but also cook. I'm going to let the other side do it probably 30 seconds or so, depending on how hot your griddle is. The hotter the griddle, the less time you're going to need to actually cook it. So I'm coaxing this along a little bit Compression tends to be one of those last variables you can manipulate as you're cooking to make sure it's rising through the center. So in order to do that, I just apply a little bit of pressure on the outsides, and you can start to see it starts to puff up. At this point, it started to cook through the center. I know that it's not gonna have a doughy, raw consistency on the inside because that steam, the steam is very evidently traveling through the tortilla. And we're pretty much good to go. I'm gonna let it sit for another 10 seconds to make sure it's really cooked through and on both sides. And that's it. So yeah, be careful when you take this off. They are super hot. I'm not gonna store these quite yet because I'm pretty hungry. So I wanna first just smell it and see how close we are to kind of what I was looking for. Remember in the beginning, if you've been to Oaxaca, we're going for a Oaxacan table tortilla here, which has very neutral pH content, which means there's not very much cal that's in the tortilla. And you can see it's pretty white. Had we not washed the skins off as much, it would have been a little bit more yellow. And some folks would have actually probably called it a yellow tortilla. So we have a off-white tortilla here, which means there's a little bit of cal. It smells amazing. It starts to sort of that toasted aroma of corn that you've been blooming and developing since the cooking process is super evident right now. Take a bite. I like a little bit of crispiness on the outside, especially if you're working with a Oaxacan style tortilla. You want to have a little bit of crust with a kind of a molten center. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what you're going for. Not to toot our own horn or anything, but that's pretty good on the first shot.